If you've ever stared at your phone waiting for a text that isn't coming, you already know the strange, quiet torture of loving someone who pulls away. You start replaying the last conversation. You wonder what you did wrong. You wonder if you did anything wrong at all. And somewhere in the middle of that spiral, a question forms that most people never actually stop to ask. What is this person thinking right before they finally reach out? Because here's the thing, nobody tells you. Avoidants don't disappear because they feel nothing. They disappear because they feel too much too fast, and they don't yet have the internal tools to sit with that feeling without running from it. And in the space between the silence and the eventual text, something is happening in their mind that almost nobody talks about, honestly. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what that is. Not the surface level advice you've heard 100 times, give them space, don't chase, focus on yourself. I want to go underneath that into the actual psychology of what an avoidant is secretly wanting, needing, and fighting against in the moments before they come back around. Because once you understand this, the whole dynamic stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling like something you can actually navigate with your dignity intact. Let's start with a truth that's uncomfortable but important. Avoidant attachment isn't a character flaw, it's a strategy. It was built, usually very early in life, as a way to survive emotional environments where closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or overwhelming. Maybe there was a parent who was inconsistent, warm one moment, distant or critical the next. Maybe there was an environment where needing something from someone else led to disappointment more often than comfort. So the child in that environment learns a lesson that gets carried unconsciously into every adult relationship that follows. Closeness is dangerous. Independence is safety. If I don't need you too much, you can't hurt me too much. That lesson doesn't disappear just because the person grows up, falls in love, and wants a real relationship. It just goes underground. It becomes the operating system running quietly in the background, even when the conscious mind is saying, I really like this person, I want this to work. So when an avoidant partner pulls away from you, what's actually happening is rarely indifference. It's usually the opposite. It's an internal alarm system going off because things started to feel good, close, real, and real is exactly what that old programming flagged as dangerous a long time ago. Now, here's where it gets interesting and where most explanations stop short. Because pulling away isn't the end of the story. If it were, avoidance would simply vanish forever the moment things got serious. But that's not what happens, is it? They come back, they text, they call, they show up again, sometimes exactly when you'd finally started to let go. So something is happening during that silence that eventually flips the switch back the other direction. And that something is what I want to unpack because it reveals exactly what they secretly want before they reach out. The first thing to understand is that during the withdrawal, the avoidant is not typically thinking about you in the way you're thinking about them. You're likely replaying conversations, analyzing tone, wondering what you said wrong. They're doing something different. They're regulating. Their nervous system got activated, not necessarily by conflict, but often simply by intimacy itself. And they're using distance the way another person might use a long walk or a closed door. It's not a message about your worth. It's a coping mechanism for an internal state that feels to them unbearable if left unmanaged. But underneath that regulation, something else is quietly happening, and this is the part that matters most. As the noise settles, as the initial wave of "this is too much" fades, a different, quieter voice starts to surface. And that voice is asking a question the avoidant rarely says out loud, even to themselves. Is it still there? Did I lose it? Do I still have a place I can come back to? This is the secret one. Before an avoidant reaches out, what they are usually looking for is not drama, not proof of your suffering, and not a grand gesture. They are looking for evidence that the door is still open, but open on terms that don't require them to perform vulnerability they're not ready for yet. They want to know that reconnecting won't immediately demand an explanation, an apology, or an emotional reckoning they don't feel equipped to have. They want low-stakes re-entry. They want warmth without interrogation. This is why so many women in this situation make an understandable but costly mistake. When the avoidant finally does reach out after days or weeks of silence, the instinct is to either flood them with everything that's been bottled up, the hurt, the confusion, the "where have you been?" or to swing hard the other way and pretend nothing happened at all, burying real feelings just to keep the peace. Both responses, ironically, can push the avoidant right back into the same pattern. The first because it confirms their fear that closeness always leads to conflict and demand. The second because it teaches them that disappearing has no real consequence, which removes any incentive to grow. What actually works and what actually reflects what they're secretly hoping to find is something in between. Calm, warm, unbothered presence, combined with honest but non-punishing boundaries. Not cold, not desperate, just steady. Let's go a layer deeper, because there's a second thing avoidants are secretly wanting in that pre-contact window, and it's one that surprises a lot of people. They want to know they haven't been forgotten, but they also want to know they haven't been needed too much in their absence. That might sound contradictory, and in a way it is, because avoidant attachment itself is built on contradiction. They want to matter to you, but they don't want to feel like your emotional world collapsed without them. Why? Because if your world collapsed, that confirms their deepest fear, that closeness creates dependency, and dependency creates danger, obligation, and the risk of being trapped. This is why the people who tend to draw an avoidant back in aren't the ones chasing hardest. It's the ones who maintained a life, who kept seeing friends, kept working toward their own goals, kept their identity intact instead of pausing it to wait by the phone. Not because this is a manipulation tactic, it isn't, and if you're doing it as a tactic, it usually shows, but because a life that stays full and steady is simply the truth of a secure, self-respecting person. And that truth is deeply, quietly attractive to someone whose nervous system is scanning underneath all the withdrawal for a sign that this connection could exist without swallowing them whole. There's a third layer here too, and it might be the most important one. Before an avoidant reaches back out, what they often secretly want is permission. Permission to come back without it meaning something they're not ready to name. They're not usually thinking, I want to reach out and declare my feelings and commit fully. They're thinking, in a much smaller, more self-protective way, I want to check in. I want to feel that warmth again. I want to see if this can just continue without a big conversation. This is why the moment right after they reach out is so pivotal. If you meet that first small gesture, a text, a like on a story, a hey, how have you been? With a huge emotional response, you can accidentally close the very door they were nervously testing. Not because your feelings are wrong, your feelings are completely valid, but because timing matters, and an avoidant testing the waters with a toe is not yet ready for the deep end. I want to pause here and say something important, because I don't want this to sound like I'm telling you to shrink yourself, hide your needs, or perform calmness you don't feel. That's not healthy and it's not sustainable. What I'm describing is not about pretending, it's about sequencing. There's a difference between suppressing your feelings forever and simply not leading with your heaviest emotions in the very first exchange after silence. You can hold your truth and still choose your moment. In fact, the people who navigate this best are the ones who get clear, privately, on what they need, and then communicate it steadily, over time, rather than all at once in a moment charged with relief and old hurt tangled together. So let's talk about what this actually looks like when it plays out well, because theory only helps so much without a picture of the real thing. Imagine someone has gone quiet for 10 days. No explanation, no big fight, just a slow fade after a weekend that felt closer than usual. During those 10 days, the healthiest response isn't obsessive analysis or repeated texts asking what's wrong. It's living your life, genuinely, not performatively. Then on day 10, a text arrives. Hey, sorry I've been off the grid, work's been a lot. Here's where the secret want comes into play. What that message is quietly hoping for, underneath the casual wording, is a response that feels easy, not fake, easy. Something like, no worries, hope work calms down soon. Warm, brief, unbothered, but also not groveling, not overly eager, not pretending the silence had zero effect if a conversation about it becomes appropriate later. Notice what that response does. It doesn't punish the return. It doesn't reward the disappearance with anxious over-effort either. It simply reflects a person who is fine, who has a life, and who is glad to hear from them without needing to prove anything. That is almost always more compelling to an avoidant nervous system than either extreme. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because integrity matters more to me than views on this channel. None of this guarantees an outcome. Understanding what an avoidant secretly wants before they reach out doesn't mean you can engineer their return, and it definitely doesn't mean you're responsible for managing their nervous system for them. You are not their therapist. You are not obligated to shape your entire personality around what makes withdrawal less likely. What this understanding does give you is something more valuable than control. It gives you clarity. It helps you stop internalizing their distance as a verdict on your worth. It helps you respond from a grounded place instead of a panicked one. And sometimes it helps you recognize the difference between someone who is doing real, if slow, internal work toward closeness and someone who is simply comfortable using distance as a permanent tool with no intention of ever closing that gap. That distinction matters enormously, so let's sit with it for a moment. Not every avoidant is the same, and not every silence carries the same secret hope underneath it. Some avoidant partners pull away, sit with the discomfort, and genuinely move toward more openness over time. Slowly, imperfectly, but really. Their secret want before reaching out is connection they don't yet know how to ask for directly. Others, though, have built an entire relational pattern around never having to close that gap at all. They reach out just enough to keep the option open, not because they're moving towards something, but because they don't want to lose the possibility of you while still avoiding the vulnerability of truly choosing you. If you're consistently the one initiating repair, consistently the one extending grace, and months or years go by without any real forward motion, that's not a nervous system slowly healing. That's a pattern you deserve to see clearly, so you can decide with full information whether it's something you're willing to keep waiting on. This is why self-respect has to sit underneath all of this understanding, not beside it as an afterthought. Compassion for someone's attachment wounds is not the same as accepting a relationship that leaves you anxious, small, and constantly guessing. You can hold empathy for why someone pulls away and still hold a firm line about what you need to feel safe, seen, and valued. Those two things are not in conflict. In fact, holding both at once, understanding without excusing, warmth without self-abandonment, is exactly the energy that tends to create the safest possible conditions for an avoidant partner to lean in, if they're capable of leaning in at all. Let's bring this back to the core question, because I want you to walk away from this with something concrete. What do avoidants secretly want before they reach out? At the deepest level, they want to know three things. First, that the connection is still intact, without needing to ask for that reassurance outright. Second, that re-entry won't come with an emotional bill they're not ready to pay. And third, that they can come back toward you without losing themselves in the process, without it meaning they've surrendered the independence that, to them, still feels like safety. None of those three wants are unreasonable on their own. The problem isn't that avoidants want space, autonomy, or low-pressure re-entry. The problem arises when those wants become the entire relationship, when the other person's needs for reassurance, consistency, and emotional presence are treated as inconvenient rather than valid. A relationship that only ever honors the avoidant's need for space and never grows to also honor the other partner's need for closeness isn't balance. It's imbalance wearing the costume of patience. So here's what I want you to take from this. The next time you find yourself in that agonizing gap of silence, waiting to see if they'll reach out, try shifting the question you're asking yourself. Instead of, what did I do wrong? Ask, what would it look like for me to stay grounded, keep living my life, and respond with warmth rather than panic if they do come back? And instead of assuming their silence is a message about your worth, remember what's actually happening underneath it. A nervous system trying to regulate an intimacy it hasn't yet learned how to hold, quietly checking, in its own limited language, whether the door is still open. You get to decide how long that door stays open and on what terms. You get to decide whether their small steps back are met with grace, or whether the pattern has gone on long enough that grace has turned into something less healthy. That decision is yours, and no attachment style excuses you from having to make it. If this helped you understand what's actually going on in the mind of someone who pulls away, stay close, because there's more I want to walk you through, including how to tell the difference between an avoidant who's slowly opening up and one who's simply comfortable keeping you on the edge of the relationship forever. That distinction alone can save you years of waiting for something that was never going to arrive.